The House Committee on Natural Resources, Environment, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation will come to order. Will the clerk please take the attendance?
Chair Pohutsky.
Here.
Representatives Hill.
Here.
Shannon.
Present.
Arbit. McFall.
Here.
Pies.
Present.
Martin.
Here.
Preston.
Here.
Shriver.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 8 members present. You have quorum.
Thank you very much. Representative Hill moves to approve the minutes from our previous meeting on October 12th. Hearing no objection, the minutes are approved. First up, we are going to have Representative Puri come up. We heard from him last week on House Bill 5028. We do have an H1 substitute, so if you would like to come up and briefly explain the substitute, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. Just wanted to speak to the H1 sub on 5028, as the Chair mentioned. Now, as I mentioned last week, our office has worked diligently on this bill for 6 months or so, taking feedback from a number of stakeholders, constituents, both in and out of our district, who were urging us to pursue this issue. There unfortunately has been a lot of misinformation in terms of the intent of the bill, so we tried to make some changes to just help further clarify what the intent was. And so we've made 3, I think, changes to the sub in front of you. The first one is we've included new language in section 13 to address common areas and shared roofs, to state very explicitly that this act does not apply to them and that this act only applies to single-family residences. The bill also includes definitions for a shared roof and the common area for what those mean. We added language on page 6, line 16, addressing safety, local ordinances, and permitting, ensuring that someone who is doing the work on their home under this act complies with all state and local building codes. Now, that was already in the first version, but again, we just wanted to further clarify that point. And we also made a big change where we have a timeline under in which an HOA is required to enact an energy policy. That was originally a 90-day requirement. Now we've pushed that back to give HOAs a year, 1 year from the effective date to do that. And so that is kind of a high level on the 3 changes. And again, appreciate the opportunity to help explain that to everyone.
Does anyone have any questions for Rep. Puri on the substitute? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we do have one person wishing to speak in opposition to the bill, Brad Ward from the Michigan Realtors.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee, Brad Ward, Michigan Realtors. I'm really actually up here to give more of a testament to, we appreciate all the hard work that Representative Puri has put into this bill. The draft that you see before you, we've provided some additional input on. Our membership would really like some further clarifications, in particular to protecting common areas. The bill before you has a lot of physical structures that it talks about when it talks about roofs, walls, clubhouses, things like that. A lot of the condominiums where you see single-family homes are site condominiums. It's the way development's been done the last 25 years in Michigan. They have a lot of common area that's green space, whether that be a common open area, periphery of the subdivision itself, that we'd like to see more specifically spelled out. Our committee also had some questions. There's provisions in the bill for freestanding solar. A lot of these HOAs don't even allow for fences or above-ground pools or structure, out structures or sheds. So we wanted to talk about that. And then the energy adoption, energy policy adoption is better than the 3 months, but it also assumes a sophistication that a lot of these HOAs just don't have. Most of these are homeowner run. A lot of the bylaws, because this is the way development occurs, are just kind of cookie cutter, cut and paste. To amend a bylaw without any kind of specific direction or language. There's direction in the bill, but specific language would probably be more helpful where they could just cut and paste it into their current bylaws. So we look forward to continuing to working with Representative Puri. My committee has identified ways that they can get behind and support this bill, but at this time we cannot lend that support.
Does anybody have any questions for Brad? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are going to be taking a vote on both adopting the substitute and reporting the bill at a later point during this committee hearing. But next up, we are going to hear testimony on a package of bills from Representatives McKinney, Hill, and McDonald. Those are House Bills 4824 through 26. So if all three representatives would like to come forward and speak to their bills, the floor is yours.
Good morning. So I just wanted to thank members on this committee for the opportunity to speak. As co-sponsors of the package of House Bills 4824, sponsored by myself, and House Bills 4825 and 4826, sponsored respectively by State Reps Jen Hill and Sharon McDonald. Together, this package of bills were removed from statute, the Environmental Rules Review Committee, also known as ERRC. Instead of providing oversight, this committee has become an overbearing obstacle in the process for the Department of Environmental, Great Lakes, and Energy, also known as the EGLE. Since 2019, literally under the Snyder administration, the ERRC has been scrutinized for decisions that ultimately put the general public in harm's way. The advisory board was created supposedly to represent the interests of industries and organizations with a stake in EGLE's environmental rules. Instead, the ERRC members have acted in their own interests. Their stall tactics of using excessively long and cumbersome reviews is potentially bringing more harm to our environment and to Michiganders. The dissolution of the ERRC is the right move, putting people first and making good on the promise to improving Michigan's environment. And I just want to also say this. This is about streamlining the process. We are going into an era of clean energy transition. There is a lot of opportunities coming from our federal government, a lot of funding available, and we cannot stand aside and make sure that this is held up even longer. So I just want to pass it off to my amazing colleague to my right, Rep. Jen Hill, who will speak on House Bill 4825 in the package.
Thank you to the committee and colleagues McKinney and McDonald today for co-sponsoring this important package. We propose this package to eliminate the ERRC and loosen its undue influence on EGLE. While we've been pushing for this cleaner, greener, renewable, and affordable energy, we've had a seated review committee that has hindered the implementation and or review of critical measures to protect our environment and all of us. In particular, the ERRC Oversight Committee had the chance to act on the quality of our drinking water. A statewide study released this summer found that 10% of Michigan's drinking water systems contain PFAS, those forever chemicals, which are found in everything from nonstick pans to firefighting foam. Excuse me. In my district, we have 2 airport sites and our waste landfill, unfortunately, are contaminated with PFAS, and we are having to address those issues immediately right now in our community. Those are immediate threats. Instead of taking action, the committee delayed the needed protection for our drinking water with stalled reviews and have withheld critical protections for Michiganders. For reasons such as this bill package to eliminate the ERRC is necessary. My colleague, Rep. McDonald, will close out our testimony.
Thank you to my colleagues and Chair Pahutsky and members of the committee for hearing our testimony today. The future of a cleaner and safer living environment for Michiganders requires cooperation between EGLE and industry. Prior to the ERRC's establishment in 2018, industry stakeholders already played a role in EGLE's environmental rulemaking. EGLE took a balanced approach which assessed an environmental rule's potential impact across Michigan, including its impact on the business community. What changed in 2018 was that polluting industries were given a formal authority to delay the implementation of new rules. The law creating the ERRC mandates that a majority of its voting members be composed of the very industry that EGLE regulates, such as oil and gas. These industry representatives are empowered to launch review periods that delay environmental protections from going into effect. That's clearly bad policy, allowing the fox to guard the henhouse. For example, as Rep. Hill referenced, the polluter majority on the ERRC voted in 2019 to delay a rule set which establishes maximum contaminant levels for PFAS in drinking water. It took 494 days between Eagles submitting the request for rulemaking and the rule set finally going into effect. To compare, when the ERRC does not vote to delay a rule, the rulemaking process lasts an average of 334 days. Those extra 160 days wasted precious time that Eagle could have used to monitor drinking water, identify drinking water sources with excessive PFAS levels, and ultimately prevent illnesses that these chemicals are known to cause. And while the rule set was ultimately implemented, there's nothing in statute preventing the ERRC from delaying important rules indefinitely. The ERRC stands in the way of Eagle fulfilling its mission to protect our air, water, land, and people, all while wasting precious time and resources. My bill in the package removes the ERRC from the Administrative Procedures Act, and my colleagues' bills remove references to the committee from other places in state law. Plain and simple, we don't need this committee to interfere with the process. We should eliminate the committee, unravel the pointless red tape, and allow Eagle's professional staff members to do their jobs. We are also joined today by representatives from Eagle to provide testimony and answer your questions. And we urge your support on House Bills 4824, 4825, and 4826 to abolish the ERRC. Thank you, members of the committee.
We have a question from Representative McFall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you guys for being here and testifying. I really appreciate this. I know you just gave an example of a delay. Do we have like an average of what the delay often is, or because I know you gave a specific, but I was just curious as to how often and if there's an average. Is that Eagle? Okay.
Eagle's going to speak to that.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Representative Preston.
So this is a public act that Senator Casperson, the late Senator Casperson, was supportive and passed. I'm just curious, this isn't about streamlining. This is about steamrolling constituents, local areas of government that really have no other choice but to take the decisions of Eagle with no other choice, no other recourse. This committee gives them a chance for further review, for variances, for oversight. When you're talking about a department that has such expansive authority, and then giving them unfettered use, this is just going to ultimately lead to abuse, which is why this was brought in to begin with. I really don't, PFAS is proliferated from Wisconsin. I'm a firefighter. PFAS is everywhere. I've been exposed. We've all been exposed. So to justify this on the backs of PFAS is just disingenuous in nature. Eagle is an expansive bureaucracy that needs a check and balance, needs a committee like this to keep them in line. And to
Rep,
have them come in and
Is
testify.
there a question?
Where is the rationale for this? Rep. Hill?
The delay in addressing what is a contaminant that, yes, it's one of those unfortunate circumstances where a chemical that had one purpose that was beneficial turns out to have a long-standing negative effect to people's health, and delaying that is a great concern. Now, it is my understanding that these panels do not have members of local government involved. Okay, pardon? Yeah, we're gonna look on that, but this is something that this is the process of deciding how to protect our public health has been going on for hundreds of years. When we figured out that that diseases could be passed from just the pump of a well handle, And so in England, that is the first instance of being able to monitor our public health. And the doctors at the time refused to believe it, and it took years for that to, for public health to begin to be understood that, that we need to make sure that our common areas are safe as each different person takes advantage of them. This is the same sort of situation, and I understand that my colleagues are afraid that somehow we're going to create a system where people are steamrolled. I hear that. The concern is that the people who are sick also need to be represented, not just the people who are making the chemicals and profiting from having them, or even unintentionally profiting. I mean, PFAS, is, again, kept people safe. It literally put out fires. That was a good thing that we needed to have happen. But now, knowing the cancer that it causes, we need to address it.
Just for clarification, PFAS is still being used by DOD. PFAS is still being used on airports. PFAS will continue to be used. It's a chemical that we cannot do without. And to strip away any type of check and balance on a bureaucracy like Eagle, I think is completely misguided.
So not to be the scientist in the room, but there actually are alternatives for PFAS and firefighting foam at this point in time.
DOD is using PFAS.
Yes, and there's work to get them moving away from it, but to say that there's no other alternative is just, it's not accurate.
No, we're using alternatives right now.
Yeah.
That are much less effective.
Are there additional questions? All right, thank you very much. Next up, wishing to speak in support of the bills is Travis Boskel of Eagle.
Good morning. Travis Boskel, Deputy Director with the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. With me is Aaron Keatley. He's our Chief Deputy Director. He's got all of our regulatory programs under his purview. So I want to thank the committee and thank Representatives McDonald and Hill and McKinney for their efforts here. We're here to support the bills repealing the Environmental Rules Review Committee, so House Bills 4824 through 4826. I'll just start with I think ostensibly this panel was created to facilitate input and stakeholder engagement in our rulemaking. But in reality, it's operated as a barrier to efficient government operation. I just want to make it one thing clear from the outset. We are the only state department that is subject to this. Every other state department has an identical rulemaking process with the same oversight. This was added just to Eagle. Nowhere else. It was specifically targeted at us. We embrace the opportunity for stakeholder engagement in our work and take that seriously. Every time that we work on a rulemaking package, we're working with a stakeholder group of experts. And that's not just folks that, we think we're in an echo chamber with. We're working with the business community, with regulated industry, with environmental stakeholders, with local government. Those folks are all in the room with us, helping us draft those rules. Now, in our role as the delegated regulatory agency with the legislature's authority to promulgate those rules, we do make some decisions at the end of the process about what best implements the legislation that we're charged with implementing and what is most protective in a lot of cases, as long as, again, it aligns with that legislative authority that we've been delegated. And prior to the creation of the ERC, those parties who had remaining concerns with our rulemaking raised those concerns to JCAR, to the legislative committee that exists to oversee rulemaking of all state agencies. And that still exists as well. So even after we come out of the ERC, these rules come over to JCAR and sit there for 15 session days. And what we've continued to see is we see the same things mentioned in the steps along the way. There's no novel new thing being created here. In the stakeholder sessions, those concerns are discussed. At the ERC, those same things are discussed, and at JCAR, sometimes they are still coming up. And when we work with stakeholders on a rule package, like I said, we're seeking out those who are most experienced with those regulations and most knowledgeable both on the potential effects and on the consequences. Those are the individuals who are able to help us the most in terms of developing an understanding of the impacts our rules might have and how they can be most effective. But in reality, the members of the ERRC, they're generalists. They don't have that specific expertise addressed in those rules. So it's really hard for them to generate this new feedback that doesn't exist either in the processes of stakeholder engagement or ultimately working through JCAR and that oversight. But, I mean, when it comes down to it, the real concern here is the potential to delay important department rulemaking in which the legislature has delegated that authority. You heard from the sponsors, there's a really clear difference between how long it takes a rule set to move through if the ERC has done what we call off-ramped it, which they have done in some rule sets, particularly those that are just implementing federal regulations that we had to move through. Those are taking 3 to 4 months shorter than the average of rule sets that go all the way through the ERRC process, where they keep the rules within their purview. We have to come back to them. They have to look at them again before they go to JCAR. And again, as the sponsor said, while the longest rule that we promulgated took almost 500 days to complete, so that's just short of a year and a half probably, the panel could delay the finalizing of those rules for years, right? When it first goes to the ERRC, that can delay up to 270 days. When it comes back after the public hearing that we have to do, that could be up to another year. And there's other steps in there that I'm not accounting for there. So I'd say it's also worth knowing the department has invested and continues to invest really significant resources into the establishment and operation of the ERC. Not only do we have a dedicated team that we've had to employ just to support the operations of this, as well as the Environmental Permits Review Commission, which was heard over in the Senate this morning, but the programmatic staff who provide compliance assistance to the regulated community, ensure that we're properly implementing federal regulations, and then ultimately delivering on our mission of protecting Michigan's environment and public health. Those folks all have to spend time working on this panel instead. So elimination of the ERC would allow us to reinvest those resources, that staff time, that expertise, into meaningful engagement with stakeholders, doubling down on the work that we already do before we're drafting a rule, and ensure that we're accomplishing our mission in a way that works best for everyone. And again, just to really reiterate it, if these bills pass and the ERC is eliminated, there's actually not a lot that changes about how our processes work. We're still working with stakeholders before and during the rule drafting process. It's still governed under the Administrative Procedures Act with requirements for public information, hearings, taking public comment, and then at the end of the process, JCAR is still there for that final chance if stakeholders have concerns. So we got to ask ourselves, if the ERC isn't generating new stakeholder engagement or providing value in some other way that improves the final outcome, are we just creating bureaucracy for the sake of it? If the goal here is efficient government that provides clarity to the regulated community, then how is this accomplishing that? And why wouldn't we take the opportunity to just align this one department's rulemaking process with the same way that it works for every other department in the state? So with that, thanks for taking our testimony, and we'd be happy to address any questions.
Thank you. I have a question. So it appears to me that there are 12 voting members, 4 non-voting members, and the non-voting members are all representatives from various state departments, including EGLE. But of the 12 voting members, 1 is a representative from local government and 2 are from the general public. These people serve 4-year terms, so it doesn't appear to me that there's any guarantee that either the local government representative or the general public representative are reflective of the community that is impacted by whatever rulemaking is going on over those 4-year terms. But am I wrong on that? Like, what is there any criteria around what local government this person is chosen from, or like an general public from an impacted community, or are these just kind of random people appointed?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, they're gubernatorial appointees, but I think it gets to one of the points I made, which is these folks are generalists, right? So they might have some knowledge of running a local government, or they might have knowledge of the solid waste industry, But let's say we're moving a package of rules on methane gas collection systems. Well, you know, if you look at that list of people, how many on that group are really going to be deeply knowledgeable of how those work? That's why we need to go out and work with the stakeholders who are running those systems at landfills, for instance. That's not a great example, but that's who we need to be working with, not a group of generalists.
Thank you. We have a question from Minority Vice Chair Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's two words I heard about delays, potential delay and could delay. Do you have specific examples of when
Yes.
a rule is delayed?
Yep. So there's a process by which the ERC can off-ramp rules. So when we submit a request for rulemaking, MOAR approves it and sends it over to the ERC. They have 35 days to decide whether they're going to keep those rules under ERC approval or they're going to off-ramp them, and we go back to the normal rulemaking process. So even if we set aside those 35 days, rules that have been off-ramped have taken an average of, just left it right here, 337 days for rules that are off-ramp from start to finish. And then the rules that have gone all the way through the process with the ERC, keeping it within and not objecting to the rules, but just keeping it over their oversight and meeting throughout the process, have taken an average of 419 days.
Okay, you just gave an example of the process. What specific rules have been off-ramped and were delayed with this process?
So the PFAS rule set that was discussed, and then an air quality rule set as well.
Okay, I understand PFAS was brought up. Was there a delay there?
So the total time it took from entry, so yes, the answer is yes. It took 494 days for those rules from start to being implemented. And that is, 160 days longer than rules who get off-ramped are. I don't know
What
how to
years
show
did these
more.
rules get presented and off-ramped and delayed? What years were that?
I believe the rule set was started in early 2019, and it was officially in effect in August of 2020.
So that was during COVID. Would your process have been promulgated the rules any different with the COVID restrictions in place?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? I'm just curious of the dates that you're using there and the coincidence and the coinciding of COVID, if that is not the best example to use for a delay in a process.
So if the rule set started in, I believe it's March of 2019, even if it took a full year, right, for it to get through, which would be the off-ramp timeline, that would have actually been in place prior to everything kind of coming to attention with COVID.
One final question. Do you have an example of any rule that would have been promulgated that was should not have been promulgated with their input?
No.
Thank you.
Representative Preston.
So you've indicated, and I understand that you don't want to be exposed to oversight by these generalists that I think possess common sense, applications to real world implications as to how it comes down on our state. Why do you guys feel that you should be able to proceed unfettered without oversight? Because the statement that JCAR and this body will provide the kind of oversight that an expansive bureaucracy like EGLE requires, I think is just disingenuous. If you could speak to that.
Well, let me start, Representative, by saying that this commission doesn't have oversight responsibility either. All it does is make recommendations to you all so that you can provide the oversight to the agency. I do take exception to your description of how we approach our processes as being unfettered and being out of control. When we approach any rulemaking, the very first thing we do is we start engaging with stakeholders on all sides of the aisle to make sure we understand what the different issues are, what the impacts can be, and whether or not there's unintended consequences of the procedures and policies that we're proposing, which are just procedures and policies to implement the statutes that you all have authorized us to implement. Once that deliberative process occurs, We then are required to go through the regulatory process that you all have defined for us that requires formal public hearing processes and written responses back to every comment we receive, whether they're valid or not, in terms of why we think that the comment that we receive is either appropriate or not appropriate to the rulemaking and why it's necessary to proceed the way it is. We then, because of this new legislation, have to go in front of the commission, who basically becomes redundant of what has already happened. They provide another forum for the exact same issues to be raised. The same discussion that we've already responded to occurs. The answers are the same. And at the end of the day, the commission has never changed any of our rule sets that has gone before it. Because at the end of the day, they've collaborated with us and verified that the process we've already gone through to ensure stakeholder input, to make sure that the agency is acting appropriate within its statutory authorities, is occurring, which is then brought back to the JCAR process, and then JCAR can make its own decision in terms of whether or not the Eagle is acting in the best interest of the statutes that have been passed by your body.
It sounds like it's working effectively then.
I'd like to add one. That's actually a great segue. I'd like to add one point, which is I'm eager to hear who might be speaking to what value this group has provided. I think in my conversations, and again, this is personal experience, I talk with regulated industry stakeholders all the time. In my experience, they tell me that they engage with Eagle through the stakeholder process that we're describing here, not through the ERRC. So I would be eager to hear if there's folks that are going to come up and say the ERRC has addressed their concerns in this way or that way, because that's not what's been described to me from regulated industry, from regulated stakeholders.
Rep. Shriver?
To that point, I don't know if you have a breakdown of who supported the establishment of these boards in 2018, but the list is extensive. Have you not reviewed that?
The question was who still finds it valuable, not who supported it then. So do you have a question relating to that statement?
Yeah, I have one question. How dare you?
I do want to address the comment as well, though.
Be respectful or knock it off.
I do want to address the comment, though. I understand the intent to increase stakeholder engagement with the department. I don't say it flippantly that we take it seriously. You can talk to the folks in this room about whether or not I pick up the phone and call them when we have disagreements on legislation, on rules. What I'm interested in understanding is, are there folks that feel like this is accomplishing that? I haven't seen that. I understand the intent. I just haven't seen it actually happening.
This is going to be the last question for this group. Rep. Preston?
Again, I don't mean this to you guys personally. My biggest concern comes with the past and more so what the future holds. Maybe what is going on right now is being done in a genuine, earnest way. What I fear for the future and why I feel that this needs to stay in place is for what the future holds when you two are not here, when the current people that are in power are not here, and how they treat the constituents, whether or not the engagement is there, or whether or not people just get run over by the rule process. That's why I feel so strongly about this.
I understand that, and I respect that perspective. I think the record would show, and I would be willing to, make sure that record is transparent to you if you're not aware of it at this point. The issues that end up getting deliberated most of the time in rulemaking is not really the nature of the rules themselves, but whether or not the policies that Eagle is trying to implement are appropriate policies, not the procedures, not the process which the rules define. Ultimately, those issues belong in this body, not in Eagle. We don't define the statewide policy for environmental protection. You all empower us. And so many of those issues that constituents you may have talked to that get raised to you and the frustrations that exist are things that you all can solve. Working with us, with our input, I appreciate, but at the end of the day, we are a body that implements administrative tasks in order to satisfy the statutory mandates. This body doesn't provide, not you all, but this commission, does not provide that additional benefit that those stakeholders are looking for. All they do is create a forum for time to pass, which is already occurring.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have testifying in Zoom, by Zoom, Christy McGilvray from the Sierra Club.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the honorable members of the House Natural Resources Committee. On behalf of our 150,000 members and supporters here in Michigan, the Sierra Club is supportive of this bill package. At the time it was passed, the environmental community argued that the ERRC, the EPRC, and the Environmental Science Advisory Board created industry-driven polluter panels with the authority to override environmental and public health protections to further their own bottom line. It was reckless then, and it is reckless now to allow regulated industries to set their own rules to protect Michiganders' health and our natural resources. Furthermore, these panels have created an unnecessary level of bureaucracy within an agency that is extremely overburdened and underfunded. The panels were put into place to slow down Eagle from carrying out its work. We've heard real-world examples of that. By passing this legislation to repeal these panels, we remove an impediment to implementing important public health policies in a timely manner. I want to take a moment, though, in this opportunity to note that undoing this Snyder-era policy is not enough to address the ongoing hurdles that Eagle faces. In 2018, before this law was passed, DEQ denied less than 0.5% of pollution permits requests, according to Governor Snyder's own data. We still have persistent problems properly issuing permits that account for the real human health impacts of air and water pollution. Eagle does not have the authority it needs to prioritize public health outcomes, even with the removal of the polluter panels. I'm going to share with the committee an example of how human health has been harmed because of the baked-in institutional imperative that Eagle faces to issue permits irrespective of how pollution emitted will hurt people. Sierra Club and the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center are currently engaged in a lawsuit against EPA because EPA agreed to accept Eagle's assertion in late 2022 that air quality data that would otherwise have tipped Southeast Michigan into non-compliance with the Clean Air Act could be excluded to determine that Michigan is in compliance. It is really important to acknowledge that Eagle's decision whether to submit any exceptional event demonstration claims, that was the loophole that they used, is completely discretionary. It is never required. And this loophole in the Clean Air Act presents a choice between taking action to avoid regulating air pollution or taking action to lower it. To put it another way, the choice Eagle made to exclude air quality data was a choice between protecting industry profit margins or protecting people's health. And I want to be clear that this is a baked-in institutional imperative. It is not necessarily the choices of individuals working there. The result of the decision to exclude air quality data to avoid further requisite actions to comply with Clean Air Act standards meant that as toxic wildfire smoke filled our skies for weeks this summer, Eagle walked away from tools it could have had at its disposal to limit other concentrated sources of air pollution. The toxic mix we suffered under this summer dramatically increased acute health problems for Michiganders. Dr. Glenn Clark, the emergency center chief at Beaumont Hospital in Grosse Pointe, was quoted in the Detroit Free Press on June 28, 2023. In Dr. Clark's words, "In the last week, we have seen a significant increase in respiratory complaints. We've seen both asthma and COPD patients who have been well controlled in the past presenting with exacerbations requiring an increase in the use of asthma medications, including rescue inhalers. Even otherwise healthy individuals have come in complaining of chest tightness and problems," end quote. We have yet to fully collect the publicly available mortality data, but we have strong reason to believe that fatalities from childhood asthma increased during this period too. The reason I'm taking this time to discuss the exceptional event data exclusion with you is because it is imperative to highlight the very real institutional problems embedded in how Eagle functions. This is a legacy from former Governor John Engler, not just Governor Snyder. The bill package before you today is a really important first step. We fully support it, but we want to make it clear that this will not solve the problem. I look forward to speaking with all of you in the future about further legislative action needed to give Eagle the real tools it needs to prioritize environmental protection and human health outcomes. Thank you for your time.
Are there any questions for Christy? All right, thank you very much, Christy. Next up is speaking in support of the bill package. We have Nick Acapinti from the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. You can come on up. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, members of the committee. Michigan LCV supports House Bills 4824 through 4826. A lot of the testimony that I was planning on giving has been covered sufficiently and thoroughly by Eagle and the bill sponsors. So I'm going to keep it very brief, and you do have my written testimony before you. You also have a chart. It's a flow chart. It's 3 pages long with a 4th page of acronyms. Hold this up. That describes the rules-making process, including the Environmental Rules Review Committee. It is quite extensive. I encourage you to thoroughly walk through this process and see the checks and balances that are already baked in and that will remain baked in to this process without the Rules Review Committee. The part that I really want to emphasize here is the added red tape and bureaucracy. This is an organization that's already under a lot of pressure to perform on behalf of the people in Michigan, protecting our air, land, water, and public health. And to waste those time and resources in a process that is not adding value is what we want to stress today. We can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. But the sharing of executive agency authority with folks that don't have the expertise and are appointed is a bridge too far. As the previous speakers have mentioned, we have all kinds of opportunities for stakeholder engagement, not only in the rulemaking process, but through boards and commissions. The opportunity to give expert advice and opinion, but it doesn't go that extra step into usurping executive agency authority. There's a reason why this was done at the end of the Snyder administration, to encumber future gubernatorial and executive agencies. So I think it's a bridge too far, and it's just not practical. It's not delivering value for the people of Michigan. It's adding significant amount of red tape and bureaucracy, and for that reason, I'll keep my testimony short here, and that is why we are supporting the bills. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Nick? All right, thank you very much, Nick. We do have some cards to read in. Not wishing to speak, but in support of not wishing to speak in support of House Bills 4824 through 26 is Liz Kirkwood of Flow for the Love of Water. Not wishing to speak, but opposing the bills is Tim Langholz from NFIB. And then not wishing to speak, but supporting 4826 is Megan Tinsley of the Michigan Environmental Council. Not wishing to speak, opposing 4826 is Carolyn Lethan from Michigan Manufacturers Association. Not wishing to speak, opposing the bill is Michael Limo from the Michigan Chamber. And not wishing to speak, but opposing is Ben Terrell from the Michigan Farm Bureau. Going back to previous business, we are going to be adopting the H1 substitute for House Bill 5028. Representative Arbit makes the motion. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
On the motion of adopting the substitute, Chair Pohutsky.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
McFall.
Yes.
Pies.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Preston.
Pass.
Schreiber.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 1 nay, 1 pass. The substitute H1 for House Bill 5028 is adopted.
Thank you very much. Next up, I will take a motion to report House Bill 28 with recommendation as the H1 substitute. That motion is made by Representative McFall. Madam Clerk, will you please take the roll?
On the motion to report, Chair Pohutsky.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
McFall.
Yes.
Pies.
Yes.
Martin.
No.
Preston.
No.
Schreiber.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 6 yeas, 3 nays, 0 pass. House Bill 5028 is reported with recommendation as substitute H1.
Thank you very much. And this was also from last week, so I'm sorry I didn't read it in before. But we do have 1 card of support for HB 5028, and that is Aaron Viles from the Electrification Coalition, who was also supportive last week. Having no absent members and seeing no further business for the committee, the committee is adjourned.